What if I told you that everything you thought you knew about Rambo First Blood is completely wrong? What if the hero you've been rooting for all these years might actually be the villain of his own story? And what if the iconic speech that made you cry, the one where Rambo screams, "Nothing is over," is actually the worst piece of writing in the entire film and completely betrays everything the movie was trying to say? Today, I am going to ask 10 critical questions about this film that you will not find anywhere else on YouTube, Facebook, or Google. These are not your average movie review questions. These are questions so deep, so uncomfortable, and so intellectually dangerous that even the most hardcore Rambo fans will be left speechless. I am going to challenge the very foundation of this legendary film and force you to see it through an entirely new lens. And when we are done, I want you to tell me in the comments which movie we should destroy next with this level of critical analysis, because this is just the beginning of a revolution in film criticism. Most audiences see Sheriff Will Teasle as a one-dimensional bully. The film cuts a crucial scene where Teasle is revealed as a Korean War veteran who feels his service has been completely forgotten. Sylvester Stallone himself has expressed regret over cutting this moment, stating it would have transformed the film from a standard action thriller into a complex study of generational war fatigue. Let's understand what this means. If the scene had remained, Teasle's hostility toward Rambo is grounded in something far deeper than petty small-town prejudice. His anger comes from seeing Rambo as the embodiment of a war that stole the spotlight from his own sacrifices. Rambo's trauma is culturally acknowledged. Teasle's is invisible. The Korean War killed 35,000 Americans, yet received none of the cultural conversation that Vietnam veterans received. Teasle's obsession with order and control reveals a man desperately trying to keep the chaos of his past contained. He asks a miner with coal dust, "You gonna take a bath this week?" This fixation on cleanliness mirrors his repression of his own trauma, keeping his emotions locked away. So we must ask, is Rambo's destruction of Teasle's town an act of justice against an unjust system, or is it the destruction of a fellow veteran whose wounds were simply different? When Rambo says, "They drew first blood, not me," does that apply to Teasle as well? The film positions Teasle's hubris as his fatal flaw, drawing comparisons to Shakespeare's King Lear and Hamlet's father, men brought down by pride and the inability to listen to warnings. But if his pride stems from being a forgotten warrior, his tragedy becomes heartbreaking rather than villainous. The title itself, First Blood, demands we ask not just who drew blood in the immediate conflict, but who drew the first blood in America's forgotten wars and whose blood matters in the cultural memory. The film presents Rambo's PTSD as the catalyst for his rampage. Released just 2 years after the DSM-3 officially recognized post-traumatic stress disorder as a formal diagnosis, First Blood is a landmark in depicting combat trauma on screen. The film opens with Rambo learning his friend Delmar died of cancer from Agent Orange exposure, an apt metaphor for how trauma affects its victim years after the original exposure, and Rambo's face goes blank, showing hypoarousal and dissociation from the external environment. We see flashbacks to torture he suffered as a POW, triggered by police brutality in the jail cell. The film explicitly connects his violent response to his traumatic past. But here is the critical question. Does the film genuinely critique violence, or does it use trauma as a narrative device to justify it? Rambo says, "They wouldn't let us win in Vietnam," a deeply problematic framing that suggests the war was a failure of strategy, not a moral failure. This is what scholars call the appeal to victimization via the will to myth. By framing America and its veterans as victims, the film avoids commenting on if the United States was right to be in Vietnam in the first place. Being a victim means never having to say you're sorry. So we must ask, is the film presenting a genuine critique of war and trauma, or is it performing trauma to provide a get-out-of-moral-responsibility-free card for Rambo's violence? The answer might be both, and that ambiguity is itself critically important. This is one of the most fascinating and widely debated factual questions about the film. Rambo is perceived as an unstoppable killing machine. The franchise's later installments, Rambo First Blood Part 2, Rambo 3, and Rambo 2008, feature kill counts in the dozens and hundreds. But in First Blood, Rambo does not kill a single person directly. The question of Galt's death is complex. Rambo throws a rock at the helicopter, the pilot overreacts, Galt falls because he was not strapped in properly, a case of manslaughter, at most, and legally, one could argue Galt's own reckless behavior and the pilot's reaction are more culpable than Rambo's action. Rambo shows restraint throughout. He deliberately maims rather than kills his pursuers. This is crucial. The film's violence is, for the most part, defensive and non-lethal. Why does this matter? Because the Rambo who emerges in the sequels is a cartoonish figure who actively seeks violent retribution. The Rambo of First Blood is a man who, when surrounded by armed men, asks, "Why are you doing this? I haven't done anything wrong." As one critic notes, First Blood is a protest film that packages its dissent within the comfortably straightforward structure of its genre. It is a tragedy first and a spectacle second. By refusing to kill, Rambo maintains moral innocence, even as he destroys property and infrastructure. The violence is symbolic, not psychopathic. The film is concerned with how society produces violence, not with the thrill of violence itself. This distinction is lost in the sequels, which transformed Rambo from a wounded soul into a xenophobic fantasy figure who treated Vietnam less as an aching loss than as a war he hadn't been allowed to win. Let's confront the elephant in the room. The climactic speech, "I could have won that war. They wouldn't let us win. Then I come back to the world and I see all these maggots at the airport, protesting me, spitting, calling me baby killer," is the most famous moment in the film. It is also, according to serious critical analysis, a terrible piece of writing that would encourage future terrible pieces of writing from Stallone. Why is it terrible? First, it is anachronistic. The film is set in the late 1970s, but the spitting on returning veterans narrative is a myth. The speech validates a fantasy of victimhood that historians have long since debunked. Second, and more importantly, it betrays the film's own complexity. The monologue paints Rambo as a patriotic warrior betrayed by a cowardly nation, who lost because politicians wouldn't let him win. But earlier in the film, Rambo is presented as confused, vulnerable, unable to reintegrate, and his violence is shown as tragic. The speech simplifies everything, replacing ambiguity with grievance. Most critically, the monologue reframes the Vietnam War as a problem of strategy, not morality. Rambo's bitterness is directed at maggots protesting the war, not at the war itself. His longing is to be allowed to win, not to question whether winning was ever the right goal. This sets the ideological stage for the sequels, where Rambo returns to Vietnam to win this time and emerges as a one-man wrecking crew of jingoistic revenge. The monologue is the moment the film shifts from trauma study to grievance narrative. First Blood is one of the few action films where the protagonist's exceptional competence is presented as a curse. Rambo is a one-man army, with survival skills that are implausible in their effectiveness, but rather than celebrating these skills, the film treats them as the source of Rambo's inability to rejoin society. He can survive in the wilderness, kill with his bare hands, and evade hundreds of pursuers, but he cannot hold a job, find a home, or form a relationship. This paradox is central to the film's critique. Rambo has been trained to dispose of enemy personnel and to survive and fight, but when he returns to civilian life, these skills have no legitimate use. He is alienated by his own abilities. As one scholar notes, Rambo reverts to the one thing he knows how to do, even though those coping strategies are likely no longer appropriate or helpful in the present. The film is a tragedy of too much competence, of a man so good at violence that he cannot escape it. The scene where he escapes from the police station, triggered by flashbacks of torture, shows that his skills are activated involuntarily. He fights not because he wants to, but because he cannot stop. This undermines any heroic reading. Rambo is a war hero, but he is an anti-hero as well. Grief and loss and PTSD have turned Rambo into a monster. The film never lets us forget that his skills were created by the military and that his suffering is the price of those skills. This is the central political question of the film. On the surface, First Blood is fiercely critical of America's treatment of its veterans. Rambo has been abandoned by the country he served and the local authorities. The police, the National Guard, the military bureaucracy are portrayed as incompetent, cruel, or cold. The film condemns the difficulties some veterans experienced following the Vietnam War. Scholars note a distrust of government following the Watergate scandal, with the local police force and the military portrayed as cruel, cold, and power-hungry. But the film also structures its critique in a very specific way. It blames society for betraying the veteran, but it does not blame the war itself. Rambo's anger is directed at maggots at the airport and politicians who wouldn't let us win, not at the military-industrial complex that sent him to Vietnam in the first place. Colonel Troutman, the figure of military authority, is the only person Rambo trusts. The film's stance is one of military reverence combined with civilian contempt. It says, America's people failed its soldiers, but the soldiers themselves are noble. This is why the film could both critique the establishment and become a Reagan-era icon. As one analysis puts it, the films illustrate many Americans' view of war during the Reagan years. Reagan famously said, "Boy, I saw Rambo last night. I know what to do the next time this happens," referring to hostage situations, and he vowed to clean up the federal tax system in the spirit of Rambo. The film's critique of government was not a critique of militarism, it was a critique of weakness. It said, we need more military strength, not less, but we need to use it properly. This is the ideology of the sequels in embryo. The film features only one female character who speaks, Mrs. Berry, the mother of Rambo's deceased comrade, and she is the only female character in the film with lines. She delivers devastating news. Delmar died of cancer from Agent Orange. Her function is purely plot-driven. No other woman in the film has any agency, dialogue, or character development. The Town of Hope is a completely male space. The sheriff, the deputies, the National Guard, Troutman, Rambo himself, all men. This absence is revealing. The film is a study of male trauma, male violence, and male institutions. Women are either absent or are the bearers of bad news. The film has been described as a hypermasculine exploration, and even its critique of hypermasculinity, Rambo cries in the arms of another man, at the end, reinforces the exclusively male frame. It is a portrait of the tragic elements of the human condition, only in its depiction of men. What would the film have looked like with a female character who challenged Rambo, questioned his narrative, or offered a perspective beyond the cycle of violence and grievance? The absence suggests that the film's universe is one where women simply do not matter. This is not a critique, it is a statement. The film's tragedy is entirely masculine, and its critique of war is a critique of how men treat men, not how men treat women, or how war affects families, or how the sexual dynamics of trauma play out. The collective cultural drama of memory and forgetting is exclusively male. Scholars have noted that the plot of First Blood bears an uncanny resemblance to the ancient Greek tragedy The Bacchae by Euripides. In that play, the god Dionysus arrives in Thebes disguised as a mortal. King Pentheus mocks him, imprisons him, and underestimates him, only to be torn apart by frenzied women Maenads when he goes into the wilderness to spy on Dionysus. Similarly, Sheriff Teasle mocks Rambo, imprisons him, underestimates him, and chases him into the wilderness, where he is destroyed. This is a profound structural choice. Rambo is explicitly compared to a god. He cannot be killed, he is invincible, even his implausible acts suggest a divine nature. Teasle, like Pentheus, is driven to functional madness by his own anger, and his obsession with order and cleanliness is an attempt to keep chaotic, Dionysian forces at bay. When Teasle says, "If people start F*** and G around with the law, then all hell breaks loose," he is trying to contain the chaos Rambo represents. But Rambo is also a man. He cries. He is traumatized. He says, "I can't get it out of my head. A dream of 7 years. Every day I have this." The film's genius is that it makes Rambo both God and man. He is unstoppable but suffering. He is superior to his pursuers but trapped by his memories. The Greek tragedy framework allows the film to be about hubris, Teasle's fatal flaw, while also being about trauma, Rambo's human cost. The film asks us to see Rambo as a force of nature, but a force created by human cruelty. He is a god we made, and we cannot contain him. The title is the film's central thematic statement. It asks, who is responsible for starting this conflict? Rambo insists, they drew first blood, not me. The police would say Rambo drew first blood by escaping and fighting back. But the film invites us to push further. Who drew first blood in Vietnam? Who drew first blood in America's treatment of its veterans? Who drew first blood in the cultural wars that created this situation? Scholars note that the title raises questions of cause, blame, honor, and duty, and functions as commentary on the Vietnam War. Who drew first blood there, and does it matter? The film's answer is that the appeal to victimization, the need to determine who started it, is itself a distraction from the larger moral questions. By focusing on who drew first blood, we avoid asking why there is bloodshed at all. The film's structure, Rambo as victim, Teasle as victim, both blaming each other, mirrors a society unable to accept culpability for Vietnam. The first blood question also applies to the Vietnam War itself. Were the Americans the aggressors, or were they responding to communist aggression? The film refuses to answer this directly, but by staging the question through Rambo's conflict, it forces the audience to ask it. And by framing Rambo as the victim who didn't draw first blood, the film absolves America of its own guilt. This is the powerful rhetorical tool of victimhood. To be a victim means never having to say you're sorry. The title is a trap, and we are meant to fall into it. The film's ending is deeply ambiguous. Test audiences hated the original ending where Rambo forces Troutman to kill him. They demanded something more optimistic. Stallone rewrote the ending so that Rambo surrenders and is led away in handcuffs, but with dignity. However, the emotional climax remains Rambo's breakdown, crying, "Nothing is over," in Troutman's arms. This is one of the great physical actors of his day, performing something unprecedented. The hypermasculine Rambo, by the end of the film, cries in the arms of another man. Is this redemption? Rambo finally expresses his grief and lets his guard down. He acknowledges his pain. He engages in help-seeking behavior. He stops running, but he is still arrested. His breakdown is cathartic, but it does not change his circumstances. He is still alienated, still traumatized, still a weapon with no purpose. The ending suggests that the only person who can stop Rambo is the man who made him into a weapon. Troutman is the closest thing to family that he has left. Rambo's surrender is a surrender to paternal authority. He finally accepts that he cannot fight the world, but he also affirms that his identity is defined by the military. The film's ending is a compromise. Rambo survives, but he is more broken than ever. He says, "I'm not asking you to understand me. I'm asking you to leave me alone." He surrenders not because he has found peace, but because he is exhausted. The ending's ambiguity is its power. It is not clear if Rambo is redeemed or just defeated. He is comforted by Troutman, the symbol of the institution that made him, and that is both moving and deeply troubling. The film refuses to let us feel unambiguously good about Rambo's fate. He is a victim, but he is also a killer. He deserves sympathy, but he has destroyed a town. The ending preserves the film's tragic complexity. So there you have it, 10 questions that rewire how we understand Rambo First Blood, transforming it from a simple action classic into a profound and deeply troubling cultural artifact. This film is not what we thought it was, and that is precisely why it matters more than ever. The questions we ask about our heroes reveal more about us than about the movies themselves, and today we have proven that even the most beloved stories can hide uncomfortable truths beneath their surface. Now the choice is yours. Do you want to keep watching movies the way you always have, or are you ready to go deeper with me into the dark corners of cinema's greatest classics? Drop your movie suggestion in the comments and let me know which film deserves this treatment next, because the conversation is just getting started.